Hi, everyone. I'm Sally. I'm the host of SAAN Share. Today, I have the ladies from 5WAVES with me. And they have an organization on sibling sexual trauma, which is a very important topic. And so I am going to turn it over to Maria right now, and she will be our first guest speaker.
Okay, let me share my screen. And thank you, Sally. We're really honored to be here tonight. Let me make this bigger. If I can find, there we go. Okay, can everybody see this okay? Right. Okay, yes, thank you. We are 5WAVES. There are 5 of us. We are calling ourselves 5WAVES. We're here to talk about sibling sexual trauma. There are 5 of us, and 3 of us are here tonight. 2 couldn't be here. So Brandy, Hope, and I'm Maria Socolof, are here tonight to talk about this topic. Okay, our goals today are to introduce 5WAVES, describe what 5WAVES is doing, define and describe sibling sexual trauma, present this current state of knowledge and press on the topic, and then bring up calls for action among sexual assault or abuse advocates. So what is 5WAVES? It stands for 5 women who came together as advocates, and the WAVES stands for Worldwide Awareness, Voice, Education, and Support, and it's around sibling sexual trauma specifically. We are, as I said, 5 women from 5 time zones, and we just came together this past fall, and we were all in our own isolation on this topic and living our own personal experiences with sibling sexual trauma. 2 of us are survivors, and 3 are parents of children who are dealing with sibling sexual trauma. Each of the parents, I'll let Hope talk in a minute, but they've all dealt with it when disclosure occurred when their children were minors. We're still at home, so we do get a lot of adult survivors disclosing later, but in their case, it was for kids that were still at home. So I guess, yeah, Hope, do you want to jump in and just give a little story of how we all got together?
Sure, thanks so much. My name is Hope Sittler. I'm, as Maria said, I'm one of the co-founders of 5WAVES, and we're grateful to be here tonight. So it always brings sort of a smile to my face when I think about how the 5 of us came together, especially after hearing Maria state that we were each living our own lives and on our own journeys in isolation. So it's the coming together actually is quite a story in and of itself. Maria and Jane, who are the 2 survivors of sibling sexual trauma, had come together. They had met through another group as survivors of SST. And so that was one connection. I continue to moderate a Facebook group called Parents Coping with Sibling Sexual Trauma and Abuse. I started that group when 6 months into my journey, I had found absolutely no one who had been in my situation, not one single person, despite really digging in and looking everywhere I could, calling local resources, and there was nothing. And I just knew logically and intellectually that I could not be the only one on the planet, but it felt that way. And so I started this Facebook group, and lo and behold, slowly and surely people started to join. And I will say, I'm sure just like SANS, we take vetting those who are requesting to join our group extremely seriously, as the nature of the topics are very sensitive and people are extremely vulnerable. So there's a lot that goes into approving each person that requests to join. And that was started in March of 2021. Now today, that same group has 250 members, all of them parents of sibling sexual trauma. Jane attempted to join our group. Now, Jane is not a parent of sibling sexual trauma. She's a survivor, and she made that very clear in her join request. However, despite her good intentions of wanting to be a resource and for other people struggling with this on the other end, as the moderator, I was holding and continue to hold very tightly to the criteria for joining, which is to be a parent of SST. And so I politely and kindly responded to her, declining her join request, letting her know that she could not be accepted because she was not a parent. When Jane tells this story, Jane says, at that moment, I knew I had a live one. And I never really knew what that meant. And I asked her one day, and she said, well, I knew that if you cared enough to be so careful about who you were letting in, and cared enough to actually message me back and let me know why you were not accepting my join request, I knew that you were someone who was ready to roll up your sleeves and do some work. And Jane was relentless. Jane continued to message me every couple weeks, every month or so. And I would send back most of the time polite thank yous or good to know, nothing more than 1 or 2 words. And one day in September of 2021, Jane messaged me, and I guess the wind was blowing in a different direction because I decided to answer her and engage in conversation with her. And in that conversation, she said to me, I have this other contact, Maria, and just this week, I have met Brandy and this other woman, Fiona, from the UK. And, all of these connections are coming together. Would you want to get on a call with all of us and let's see what we can do? And to my own surprise, I said yes. And so I would say, if it wasn't later that day, it was within a few days after that, the 5 of us got on a Zoom call, just like this. And for many of us on the call, I know at least for me, I will speak for myself, it was the first time I was speaking out loud about what was happening in my own family. Anything that I had talked about prior to that was just in typing on Facebook or through text, and it lacked a certain amount of personalizing the stories. And sometimes chemistry is just there. And the 5 of us over time really became to trust one another and like one another and lean on one another, both in the advocacy work we were doing and personally, and supporting one another in our collective efforts and in our individual efforts. And we knew the first thing we wanted to do, everyone on that initial call said, we need to create a website. We need to create a website. Well, God bless Brandy, who had already been working on and creating a website, just had all of this content, this beautiful, unbelievable content already written. And she was just looking for how to get it to the actual internet. And so we all joined forces on that project, and we all just took such pride, but no more than Brandy, that we were able to launch www.siblingsexualtrauma.com, which is the first of its kind website, completely comprehensive about sibling sexual trauma, that has information for survivors, for victims, for children who have harmed, for parents, for professionals, for extended family and friends to understand what the situation is and what people that they are related to or friends with may be going through and struggling with. And it has gained so much traction and so much traffic over since January, just really not long at all. And so once that website was launched, the 5 of us were ready to roll up our sleeves and say, what's next? And we needed a name. We kept saying, we're 5 women in 5 time zones and 2 survive. It was too long of an intro. So 5WAVES was born. And here we are, and we're continuing along in our efforts and continuing to grow our own personal relationships as well, which I know I am very, very fortunate for.
Yeah, and thank you, Hope. And let me add, I am not muted. Okay. Let me also add that when Brandy was preparing all this content, she promised her own children that she would make sure survivors reviewed it. So that's how she ended up contacting Jane, who was busy getting ready for her TEDx talk, and then called me because we had connected through Incest Aware. So that's how I ended up, and we all ended up helping review the content, but Jane and I were specifically able to review that content for Brandy that she had promised would be done. And also there were professionals, she had some professionals review other areas too that were relevant. So we are, as Hope said, very proud of that website through Brandy's doing.
Can I jump in here? I just want to say to our viewers who just joined us, we had talked about this before, but we did it before the recording. We have Hope disguising her voice and not being on camera in order to protect the anonymity of our children, and Brandy as well. That's why we have Hope and Maria speaking for Brandy. They're reading what Brandy is writing, and I just gotta say that's just so respectful of their children as far as it's their stories. So that's just part of the explanation of why we're doing it the way we're doing it. All right, Maria, I'm gonna stop talking.
Okay, thanks. Okay, some of this already now got covered from what Hope just told us, but I'll list some of the other things. So I'm sorry, I've got to move things on my screen. So what we're doing, we've got the website, the siblingsexualtrauma.com, Hope's Facebook page, which she mentioned, Parents Coping with Sibling Sexual Trauma. We also have our own 5waves.org website, which just kind of talks about us a little bit and some of the projects we are doing. And there's also a Facebook page, 5WAVES. And Fiona is working on establishing parenting programs, and that's something that she's working on in currently. We also do a lot of speaking out, and like I mentioned, Jane scored the very prestigious Boca Raton TEDx talk, and she gave that in January. And since she can't be here with us, she's traveling actually. I do have about a minute, if you don't mind, to listen to her beginning of her talk. I'll just let her jump in virtually here. If I can do all this right. Sorry, not sure how to get out of this talk. Wait a minute.
Press the escape button.
I did, and it's not, oh, I guess I have to hit it twice. Oh, I didn't get it right. Sorry about that. So this, I'll just do a minute for Jane.
Sibling sexual abuse. In many ways, sibling sexual abuse, or SSA for short, is the last taboo subject. No one wants to talk about it, and too few people are studying it. This means countless children, parents, and communities are suffering, alone and unheard, without guidance, support, or even empathy. It's a silent epidemic. That's why we need to help survivors share their stories in order to build a community of people who could demand new research and solutions. So, what is sibling sexual abuse? Well, it's murky. Because of its secrecy and lack of research, even the experts can't agree. 40 years ago, when it happened to me, I thought only adults can sexually abuse kids. Even today, many parents and kids still believe the same thing. What we do know is it involves a...
All right, sorry. It's about a 12 or 13 minute video, so you guys can watch that once we're done. I just wanted to give you a little taste of Jane, and it's already got about 69,000 views on that. So, and that was dropped on YouTube in April. So we do speaking out in a lot of other places. We do guest speaking on podcasts. Here we are. This is SAAN Shares. We also have blogs on the website. Might talk about a little more if we have time. And Jane and I both have our personal websites. Mine about the healing from chronic pain, and hers is focused on sibling sexual trauma. And I have a memoir out. Can't even think of the name right now. The Invisible Key, unlocking the mystery of my chronic pain. And Jane is working on hers as well. So it's to be called Complicated Courage, as far as we know. I just want to list some of the collaborators we've met and have worked. I say worked with, but a lot of it's for doing podcasts and just connecting with these people or organizations. I want to specifically point out Siblings 2. It's a podcast, and she also has a website. Nancy Miller has it out of, Nancy has it out of Canada, but it's a great podcast and resource. And she also takes people's stories anonymously to use for research. So on the website, you can tell your story anonymously, and it goes into some of the research they're doing. So that's one of all these that is specifically targeted on sibling sexual trauma.
Maria, we're having a little trouble with your sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to plug back in.
Okay. All right. Got it.
I wasn't sure it was going to work. I apologize. Is that better? Okay, sorry. So these are the organizations we've collaborated with. I was just saying Siblings 2 is one specifically I wanted to point out because it's targeted specifically on sibling sexual trauma, as opposed to all these others, which do a host of other things. But they do have a place where you can anonymously tell your story on their website, #Siblings 2. Okay, and we're happy. We would love to work with others, other organizations, people represented here at SAAN, to speak, or whatever we can do together to make change and grow awareness. Essentially, is what we really want to do. I think Hope did a good job of describing the sibling sexual trauma website. It's huge. It's here. I just took a screenshot of the top menu, and there's about 9 categories, and under each of these categories, there's a drop-down list, and there's a total of about 70 different pages on different topics related to this. And it can be, some are for survivors, whether they're adult survivors or they're teens at this point who might be looking for information, any age really, but we expect it would be teens. If anyone younger probably wouldn't be looking on the internet for it. But for parents as well, the siblings who have caused harm, and any other family members, as well as professionals, because there's not a lot of information even in the professional field of people understanding the magnitude and what's really going on in secrecy, so much secrecy. And again, it covers all levels of sexual harm or suspected harm. So it really runs the gamut of everything. And it's, like Hope said, it's just a huge, amazing resource. It also, on the top, it has links to, what do you call them? Can't think of the word, but there are links to rain.org and things like Stop It Now, where hotlines, that's what I was trying to say, where you can go directly from here. It's really a resource hub where there's lots of links, there's lots of resources to bring you to other places that would have what somebody might need.
Maria, can I just make one comment? When disclosure happened in our family at the end of October of 2020, and I turned to Google to find anything, anything, there was nothing came up. I could not find anything. Maybe I think there was 1 or 2 very, very outdated articles that on the whole said nothing. But the fact that this resource now exists it has brought so much information to the world in a very short period of time, where it wasn't necessarily adding to what was already there. It was initiating this subject into the public realm in a way that has never been done. And I think the example that I always use to illustrate this is just the mere fact that the domain name siblingsexualtrauma.com was available and was inexpensive to purchase shows you just how little there was out there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a sort of one of a kind still, and we're so happy we have it to offer now. So what is sibling sexual trauma? Essentially, it's harmful sexual behavior among siblings. Now we use harmful sexual behavior, and that's what the industry now is using, instead of saying it's sexual abuse, because it's involved children on children. And we really need to distinguish it from adult on child, because it just has a host of different aspects. But the definition here, as it says, developmentally inappropriate sexual behavior displayed by children and young people, which is harmful or abusive. And I highlighted harmful or abusive because it does include abuse and abusive behavior. I know some survivors have said, see harmful behavior as not as severe as abuse. But the harm, in a definition, harmful is overriding, and any kind of harm, and abusive harm is harm as well. So I just don't want anyone to think that we're minimizing this in any way. But we find harmful sexual behavior is a better overreaching definition to use in the case of sibling sexual trauma. Like I said, it's among siblings, can be biological, step siblings, or really anyone living in the same home. And a lot of times we also hear it can include cousins and other relationships as well. We're focusing here a little bit more on people in the same household. And also we've heard sometimes they say who self-identify as siblings. And it's really those close relationships what makes it so difficult and so traumatic. And it can be a brother to sister, it can be brother to brother, sister to sister, and sister to brother. All forms it can be. Right now they seem to think that it's more prevalent within the brother to sister situation, which is likely the case, but there's such lack of information that we really don't even know the numbers yet. And it can be multiple siblings involved as well. Some of the characteristics. First of all, it often starts sooner than other child sexual abuse. We have some statistics here that 50% of children affected are not even 8 when it starts. It often lasts longer than other child sexual abuse, and 75% is reported to go on for more than a year, and on average it might last about 5 years. Again, these are some data points, but there's a lot of lack of information, so there's still a lot to be learned in the future, hopefully, when we can get more data. How often? It can be from one time. In my case, it was literally one time, and it was enough to make me put it out of my brain for 32 years. I didn't remember, and I dealt with chronic pain as a result, and other anxiety and things. So it can be once, it can be sporadic, it can be several times a year, month, day. It can happen so often because the children are in the same home, and there's just so many opportunities really for it to happen. And at the same token, where it can be anywhere in the home, it doesn't have to be in the bedroom necessarily. It can be in the living room when they're watching TV, when one child is babysitting the other, when in the hallway, whenever they have an opportunity, it can happen, and it does happen. And globally, and in any socioeconomic environment as well. And we often are asked, is some behavior okay? Well, what about normal sexual play? And yes, that is a thing, and but it's for cases where the ages are very close and both are participating and kind of giggling and laughing and saying, oh, I'll show you yours, you show me mine, that kind of thing. That is normal curiosity and usually just passes relatively quickly. It doesn't go on for a long time. And again, it's usually have to be similar age and follow those criteria. But because we know that there is some normal play, a lot of it gets dismissed. A lot of the sexual trauma gets dismissed because it is far more common than people do realize. And not only is it, there's normal behavior, but it's hard to identify when it's not, when it is sexual trauma or sexual abuse. And there's no definite power differential in this case where you have an adult versus a child. That's more obvious. And when you have a much older, like a 17-year-old with a 8-year-old, that's even more obvious. We can identify, but still, it's not always clear. And issues of consent are very difficult to determine. I mean, children don't even know what that means. A young child doesn't know. And are we even given an opportunity to consent? In some cases, no. I personally was asleep when I was getting molested, and then I woke up to realize what was happening. And so consent really isn't, that's the thing we talk about with adults a lot. And it's even hard there when we're, talking the work environments and places that we have those conversations now. But with children, it's even more difficult to establish or determine. And basically, people don't want to believe that sexually inappropriate behavior can even happen among siblings. It's just kind of icky. And it's just much easier for people to deny it and turn their shoulder and just think it must be normal, or just not want to be able to deal with it, not want to deal with it. So just kind of go in denial. And like I said, it's often dismissed as normal play, but there's a lot of cases where it is a trauma. So what's the prevalence of sibling sexual trauma? Well, I put the question mark there because it's a really good question. We know some things, but we don't know a lot. And if you just see the little graphic here of the iceberg, trying to get an idea that, some of it's disclosed and believed, some may be disclosed and just dismissed and not even believed. And then we have a statistic that maybe it might be about 85% of sibling sexual trauma is not even disclosed. So what do we know on that 15% that we even know about? There's some data that say it could be 3 to 5% of children are sexually harmed by a sibling. There's other data that show a lot higher numbers, but we don't know whether it's defined as harmful. Each study kind of looks at it in a different way and defines things differently. So it's hard to say. So conservatively, we can say I would say at least 3 to 5% of children are sexually harmed. And if you think about that, that's about one child in every classroom of 25 kids. Or in the US alone, it's about 2 million kids, if that number is even accurate. But we know it's an underestimate. Like I said, it's starkly underreported. There's a study that just came out this year out of the UK, and they are saying that it's the most common form of child sexual abuse in our homes. So it's something we need to take seriously and raise awareness. So why don't survivors tell? We know for any sexual assault and abuse, there are many reasons. Specifically with children, young children, often they don't even have words or language for it. They don't know what it is. And especially if it's not spoken about in society or anywhere, we don't know nobody knows what it is, especially a child, and even an older sibling who, just it's not talked about, so we don't have any context for it. A lot of children don't even know if it's abuse. They don't know any different, and think maybe this is what all siblings do, until they get older and realize that's not the case. For those that do understand and feel that it was harmful, there may be a lot of fear of retaliation. They may have been threatened and coerced and things. They may fear being disbelieved, being blamed, even being punished. fear of breaking up the family is huge, because as children, we need our parents, we need someone to take care of us. And if we break up the family, what are we left with? No one to take care of us. So that's a huge reason why people don't tell, children don't tell. And even why people don't tell until decades later, often, even those who remember still hold it in for decades. In many cases, sometimes they wait till their parents have died because they couldn't bear telling their parents. And they also worry about getting the sibling in trouble sometimes, because it is, we have loving relationships with our siblings, and then something happens like this, and it's just this cognitive dissonance, essentially, that you don't even know how to process it. But at the same time, you're still looking out. I still find to this day, I want to protect my brother. So it's an interesting dynamic. And then there's those of us who don't remember. And there's a few statistics here that there's one study, or a few studies, that ranged between 40 and 60% of child sexual abuse survivors that don't remember, that have dissociative amnesia. And another study showed incest survivors having 30 to 40% not remembering. So that's a huge amount of people that just, the trauma was so great that their brains put it out of their minds, out of their consciousness, until later, either when they could handle it or when they couldn't hold it in anymore, subconsciously. That was more focusing on survivors. Now they're looking at the other side of it. Yes, kids can harm other kids. And it's something that a lot of adults just have a hard time processing. But it occurs very frequently. This number, again, is the minimum. We think that probably at least a third of child sexual abuse is child on child. There are studies that show up to 70, even higher percent. Again, I'm being conservative here because there's, the studies are different in the populations that they look at things. So I would say at a minimum, it's 30% of child on child. And that could be a neighbor, that could be a babysitter. That's not just siblings in that statistic, but it just shows you that it's occurring. And the most likely age for anyone to sexually violate a young child is 13 to 14. So really, this adolescent age is when children are changing, and curiosity comes in, and they don't understand their actions, the consequences of their actions often. So that gets into some of the reasons or the risk factors. Certainly if there's prior sexual abuse, as well as some of these others, exposure to violence, other abuse or neglect, exposure to sex, early exposure to sex and pornography is a big issue, especially with the access on the internet now. Other things everyone can read here, but curiosity, like I said, is another important one, and lack of impulse control, lack of understanding of what they're doing and why it's wrong, all plays into how it can easily happen. Some of the impacts of sibling sexual trauma, I've broken it out for survivors, parents, and those who cause harm. I know more about personally from the survivor's perspective, but it's similar to those, to the after effects of incest, in this, that there's disruption of developmental tasks. There's those feelings of guilt, shame, confusion, all that. Of course, behavioral, mental health, and relationship problems in the future, PTSD, physical health problems, and a greater risk for abuse later in life. And I think that's an important thing I want to point out, that especially for advocates in any area of sexual assault and abuse, that there's a good chance that the people you are seeing who are identifying as victims of domestic abuse or other sexual abuse and things could very likely have sibling sexual trauma in their past, and not even realize it was what it was, or just not identifying with that because it's again not spoken about, and don't even know if it's really a thing. For parents, maybe I can let, if Hope wants to jump in, but I have feelings of lack of control, loss of family and parental identity, and of course, denial, shame, guilt, shame, anger, all these emotions. Hope, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I mean, I would say that those are at the highest level in terms of the impact. For me, my feeling is that on the night we found out what was happening, I describe it as though the ground opened up beneath me and that I was just free falling with no way to grab onto anything. There was nothing to hold. And that feeling continued for a really long time, well over the first year. And still, that feeling still comes back. But the bottom line is, after that night, our family has never and will never be the same again. That's not to say that one day we might not have some semblance of our family intact once again, but it will forever be changed and forever be different for every single member of our family, both me and my husband and my 3 children. So, all of those things that Maria spoke about and that are listed on this slide, they're all there. And I would say all the white space you see around the slide, around all that text, those are all of the other feelings and all of the other huge challenges that come with this type of situation within a family. And I will add that Brandy is sharing that there are feelings of failure as a parent and a person are very common, and that she experienced those feelings too. And that resonates for me as well. I spent a long time, and when the days get the better of me, I still spend time thinking, what didn't I see? Where did I go wrong? What did I miss? What didn't I look carefully enough as? What didn't I do correctly? Was the babysitter there too often and I wasn't there? Or was I working too much? I mean, the questions and what ifs can be relentless.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. Yeah, I know we've, it's already 8, so let me just jump ahead. The one who caused harm also, I don't have a lot here. I'm sure I could add more. I don't have that personal experience, but we don't want to forget that this is traumatic on all sides, and these are children, and they can have first denial, but guilt and shame as well. And we do know that with treatment, there's a very high likelihood that they will not go on to abuse or harm others. So that's why it's so important that in our messaging that we understand that and don't put them in the category of monster, and as we do with adults, because there is the ability for us to make it better and prevent more in the future if we don't demonize them as well.
Maria, I will just add, first, Brandy had typed in the chat that the child who is harmed or the one who caused harm, they are at high risk for suicide and other mental health consequences that can last a lifetime. And I agree with that and see that from personal experience. And Maria, you hit the nail on the head. After 18 months of intensive treatment at a sex-specific treatment facility, of which there are only 5 of those types of programs in the country, my son who harmed, one of the toughest things he continues to deal with on a daily basis is the guilt and shame, and how to accept what he has done and what consequences have come of those actions, and fold that into his life and not have it consume his whole life. He is just about to turn 15. He has, we hope, a long life ahead of him. And that's something he's going to battle every single day.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So how, I think I've covered most of these things. How it's different. It's, different from adult to child. There's no obvious power differential. Opportunities are frequent. It lasts longer and can begin earlier. Covered most of these, and just how destructive it is to the family. And And to what Hope was saying too before, one of the things we call it sibling sexual trauma as opposed to abuse, because it is traumatic to everybody. And I guess I already said that, but yeah, so we want to make sure that it's not focused on, well, we of course want to focus on the survivors because we have a lot to deal with and heal from being in that situation. But again, the family is a family trauma that everybody needs help. Again, there's just a huge stigma and taboo around this, which again leads to that serious isolation we mentioned. And we already talked about how we came together in those circumstances as 5WAVES. And just basically, if it's not talked about or recognized or named, not within families, not in education, not in law enforcement, how can we do anything when it's so silent? And even within the sexual assault community, a lot of places it's not pulled out and mentioned. So this is again what we just want to make sure it gets into all the messaging in all these areas so that it's not forgotten. And again, it's as it can be a risk factor for future abuse. We just have to recognize that this is there and not have people feel so isolated and alone and thinking they're the only one and not even knowing if it's a real thing. We have to battle that. I see there's a comment, but I'll keep going. So, and Brandy's story here, she talks about when she was seeking help and she really found, and she can speak better to this obviously, but that when she was looking for help for the child that had caused the harm, everything was given to her as if that child was an adult, and nobody was giving her information that she needed to how to help this child. And it was just, she said she felt so unseen, and it was obviously extremely frustrating to not be able to do what she wanted to do the best she could for both her children, all her children. And it just wasn't possible, which led her to then do the work she did to come up with the website. And here we are today. And then as survivors, Jane says this a lot too, that we've all heard from many other survivors and parents. Jane especially, she has on TikTok and Instagram, she gets a lot of survivors contacting her because it's anonymous for them. But she hears all the time, I thought I was the only one. And that's the way we feel. I felt, I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't even know that I just assumed there were other people out there, but I'd never, until I met Jane, never met anyone who said out loud that they had been abused by a sibling. So again, it's so hidden. And the current state, I have a couple quotes. There's one from that recent study that just came out this year that basically says survivors don't even know if it's abuse. I can just read this quickly. Again, it's the 2022 study from the UK. It said adult survivors of sibling sexual abuse do not necessarily know whether their experiences of sibling sexual abuse count as sexual abuse and or falls within the definitions of child sexual abuse or interfamilial sexual abuse. Survivors question the validity of their own abuse and whether they themselves, society, professionals, or their family would recognize it as abuse. So we don't even know, what it is ourselves, which is just tells you the current state of the hidden nature. Also from that report, survivors said that all the survivors said that none of them were getting enough support that they needed. There's among professionals, the study also found that among professionals, there's a lack of training and processes and expertise even to help families with sibling sexual trauma. It's often dismissed and minimized, but sometimes catastrophized even within the same situation. Actually, Fiona had a situation where the first time she tried to go to social workers or to professionals, they minimized it. And then the next time when she tried, it got catastrophized. So, there's just no training and things that are out there to help people in this arena. And the press hasn't covered it really to any way, in the adequate way. So basically, when something isn't named, it doesn't exist, and therefore there's no policies, research, help, or movement toward prevention at this point. So the action steps for advocates, basically, I've been saying, is to incorporate sibling sexual trauma into our messaging and our advocacy work. That same study from 2022, they, a quote here, for national and local policies and strategies tackling child sexual abuse, they say they should name, acknowledge, and address sibling sexual abuse as the most common form of child sexual abuse in our homes. And another study, that was 2022. There was a study in 2012 that lists these similar things of what needs to be done. And that was 10 years ago. And here we are still saying the same thing. So we've got to just be louder and and scream louder, as far as I can tell. But we do now have the siblingsexualtrauma.com website as a great resource. So at least we can start directing people there, and professionals as well as survivors and families, to start getting people the help they need. There's a few things just want to reiterate, I guess, that sibling sexual trauma is a risk factor for later abuse that is not usually disclosed soon after it occurs. It's not the same as adult on child. It's not always brother to sister or a large age gap. And not all survivors necessarily want to end contact with their sibling either. Again, it's about whether their family is going to stay together and not wanting to break up the family. So it is a family crisis, and all parties do need help. Just another quick thing about language. I think most of us in this community are using survivors instead of victim. But for the one who caused harm, which we like to use that terminology instead of perpetrator or offender, again, because it's not an adult, it's a child whose brain isn't developed and still has a ways to go, and can, certainly with treatment, be in a much better place than being stigmatized from day one and being called a monster and a pedophile, which does not generally happen. So we want to make sure that language is used. And we do like to say sibling sexual trauma instead of sibling sexual abuse, but we sometimes do use the latter because it's out there commonly. But again, the trauma focuses on the harm done and the trauma to the whole family, as opposed to trying to define what the abuse was and what exactly happened. It doesn't necessarily matter. Just that there was some sexual type of trauma that caused harm. And again, the one who caused the harm is not a monster, not likely a pedophile, I said. And they're less likely to seek help if they've been demonized. So we don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to get help as they need it. So finally, in our messaging, in all the messaging from advocates, sibling sexual trauma does happen. We have to believe survivors. A lot of times they're just dismissed and told that it's nothing, just kids, it's fine. But that's often not the case. We do need to support both the survivors and those who caused harm, so they're not afraid to come forward. And there's a whole, in fact, in that 2012 article that I can give a link to, they also have other suggestions on action items. And as far as prevention, things like when you talk about good and bad touch, include the possibility that it applies to siblings and other children and not only adults. Because like Jane even said in her TEDx talk, she didn't know it could happen between children. And most people don't, honestly, or don't want to think about it. So they're happy to think it doesn't happen, but it does. So finally, I think I've said all this already, but it's a starkly hidden taboo, which compounds the isolation, self-blame, and shame among all those involved. But through awareness, we can help to and begin to destigmatize sibling sexual trauma, bring it out of the shadows, including in the sexual assault communities. Because like I said, it's not always talked about. And and then help parties find resources and encourage education, research policies, and prevention. And we're starting there by sharing our siblingsexualtrauma.com website and speaking whenever we can on the topic. We do have an email, info@5waves.org, and we have a Facebook page too, where you could contact us as well. And that's, I hope it didn't go too long, but that's it. I do, for fun, I want to just share one thing that I did now. This is supposed to kind of make your eyes spin, because after, as Hope said, when we first had that call with the 5WAVES, this is what I had to go back and do to wrap my brain around the conversation that the 5 of us had just had. Because I came from, as a survivor, who had, I was 10 and I'm in my 50s now. So it was, 40 some odd years later, I've been dealing with this alone, in my own body, in my own head, and on my own. But once I heard all the other stories and how complicated it was, I just put this together to illustrate how complicated it is. So on that note, let's, I guess, just see if Hope or Brandy want to, Hope or Brandy want to say anything, and then we can have questions.
Maria, I always love when seeing this page. It really does begin to capture just the unbelievable complexities of what we're dealing with. I just want to add a couple of things in no particular order that relate to some of the things Maria said. In terms of, Maria mentioned a lot that it's a family trauma, and everyone involved in the trauma really needs help in order to heal. And one of the things that makes that very challenging, quite frankly, is the expense and the accessibility of help. First of all, there's a lack of expertise and experience among the professionals who deal with other forms of trauma. That's problem number one, is finding someone who has experience in this type of sexual abuse, particularly between siblings, and what that means for family dynamics. And then there is the literal cost of help and the expense of it. And when you have multiple children and parents and the family unit and the marriage, et cetera, all of which has been impacted, the oftentimes help that's needed can be inaccessible or unaffordable. And so, that's something that we're hoping can change down the road as we continue to bring awareness and advocacy around this topic. I would also just mention, in terms of the child who has harmed, that because they are children and because their brains, are not fully developed, and because we as parents or as people who are involved with these children don't necessarily know the full person that they are becoming, I can only mention this anecdotally because we have not yet seen studies on this, although I hope that we will one day. There needs to be a consideration of other neurological or mental health diagnoses that seem to be linked, not for all children who have harmed, but I am seeing many stories of that, either of diagnoses of autism spectrum disorder, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression, anxiety, OCD. All of these types of diagnoses can play a part in terms of a child's ability to decipher right from wrong, to be able to control impulsivity, to be able to process consequences and process what happens from their actions in the moment. I will share that my son, my child who harmed during treatment was diagnosed as high functioning autistic. And when we had a better understanding after neurological testing was done, the vast difference between his overall IQ and his ability to process, it started to bring many facets in focus. And this is not to excuse the behavior in any way. It is not to minimize it in any way. It is not to let him off the hook, so to speak, in any way. This is just, it's just fact. And if you start to understand some of the uniqueness of the children, because they are children, I mean, and that can help to start give a better understanding perhaps. And again, it doesn't change the scenario. It doesn't change the fact that they harmed my 2 other boys. It doesn't change the fact that all of them will have to live with this forever, and we as parents. But I do think it gives credence to what Maria was speaking about, that these are children, and with the right interventions and the right treatment and ongoing treatment, that these behaviors are things that can be dealt with and healed and helped, and that these children can go on to live happy, healthy, productive lives, not free of the harm they caused, but moving forward in a direction that we hope for all of our children.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. And then there's the prevention side of it. These are for families who are dealing with it, after the fact. But the more we speak out too, we want to get to that prevention side so that, children understand that you don't touch your sibling, or, all the messaging that we need to put on the prevention side, so that hopefully this won't happen as often as it does.
I also just want to add, Brandy has typed in the chat, I would like to emphasize how much sexual assault advocates can do to help with this. First, I'm so glad that you are all doing this work. It's something you never think about until you need it. But I was so glad there were advocates there when our family did need it. If your organization can look at their messaging, materials, even images, and make sure sibling sexual trauma is mentioned and included, that will go so far to raise awareness and make survivors and parents feel seen.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my own material and my presentations, and I'm like, I gotta redo this. I gotta redo that. I gotta redo this. I have to tell you, as a prevention educator, and the training that I had going around, I didn't have any training on sibling sexual trauma. And that was one of my biggest fears, was I would get somebody in the audience who would disclose about that and then ask me a question about that, and I wouldn't know. And so I never touched the issue with the 10-foot pole. I would always address adult to children sexual abuse, not even child to child, because there was just nothing out there that I could see. And so I'm so happy the website is out there.
Yeah, that's absolutely the problem. It's not in the training. It's not spoken about, even where, in the professional fields. So thank you for hearing us. And and sometimes it may be as simple as a word, just, tweaking something, or like Brandy said, a picture, where it doesn't have to be an adult. Maybe there's 2 children in a picture, just some simple things that just make it a real thing.
We have, sorry, and I'm going to speak. We have about 15 minutes left. So if anyone had any questions they wanted to ask while we were recording, then I wanted to give the opportunity to ask them. And you can type in the chat or speak up now if you need to, and say who you're addressing the question to. That'd be good too.
Brandy also has commented, I just updated a bunch of materials for professionals on the website, and it's a great place to send your clients to.
Oh, Sally, you're muted.
Yay, here I am. Okay, we had people thanking you guys in the chat. This is the first time a lot of people have actually been hearing of this or talking of this or hearing any of the statistics. So I'm pretty excited that you ladies came together and are coming forward to teach all of us. Oh, we do have a question in the chat. What should parents be saying to their children if they suspect something has happened?
So that's
I hope you wanna.
that's a really great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer. You know, I had actually been working on a draft curriculum for the local elementary school here, and I was modeling it after the DARE program, for any of you who might remember DARE in your elementary schools. Because there's something about a parent bringing this to their, if you suspect something has happened, that's one thing. But in terms of just preventative general education, you know, when you speak about good touch and bad touch and stranger danger, there's, through all of those conversations, you're keeping the sanctity and safety of the nuclear family intact. And as a parent, I could not imagine proactively coming forth to my children preventatively saying, oh, and by the way, if your brother or your sister or whomever touches you, that's bad. And you should come and tell mommy and daddy, because I believe that that would inherently instill some type of concerns around trust and safety within the home. And that is a sacred space in which we want our children to feel like they have unconditional safety, that they will be safe in their own home. Now, that's not always the case. I mean, look at those of us who are parents of sibling sexual trauma that happened right underneath our roofs. Sometimes they're not safe in their own home. The way I handled it was I suspected something purely on mother's intuition, and that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But the way I handled it was to, I approached my son, who I believed was likely the victim at the time. And I basically pretended like I already knew something. And I said to him, I know what's going on, and we need to talk about it. And when he didn't fight me, when he didn't stop me, when he didn't say, what are you talking about, Mom, and rolled his eyes at me, I knew something was going on. I still didn't know whether or not it was something sexual in nature, but I knew it was something. And I was very careful not to ask questions and not to put any language in his mouth. I wanted it to come from him. I needed it to come from him, not being biased by anything that I might say or ask. So it took well over an hour, but through prompting and prodding, I drew it out of him. And when he finally did disclose in his own language with his own words, that was the opening for me to then explore further and, you know, try to get a handle on what actually had been going on.
Yeah, thanks, Hope. It looks like there was also a question earlier about how to handle it when it's disclosed in adulthood. I guess I can share my experience. I mean, I didn't remember till I was 42. And I did pretty immediately told my parents, my mother. So I don't know it from the parents' perspective, but I was lucky that I was believed and supported. And I know people who are not, even as adults, still, it's either sort of dismissed, saying, oh, that was a long time ago, you know, get over it, don't worry about it. Don't do that. You know, we just need support and being believed. And because we're still, I mean, I was, you know, my brain was still that 10-year-old. when this all came back for me. And, you know, I had to process it. It's taken me years. I'm 57 now. So it's been a lot of years of still processing it. So to not be believed at any moment in your life, you know, it's re-traumatizing essentially if you're not believed, even as an adult. So that's just huge. And just support. And I know, you know, even for my own parents, it's like, how they're in the same situation. How do they deal with it? 2 children they love, you know, what do they do? So I've been lucky that I've gotten support, and they've supported my sibling as well. And we've been working through it. So, you know, the best you can is just support. And if they're, you know, if they're able to ask for help, then we've got this website, we've got other resources that we link from there for survivors. So there's help out there, and now this will at least show them that they're not alone too. And if they choose to not want to associate with the family, honor that. It's difficult, and that's a lot of people do choose that. A lot of people try to reconciliate, and you know, I'm in that process. You know, things are going well in my case with my sibling. And it's taken time. It's taken a lot of time, a lot of back and forth. And I'm lucky that he's been responsive and apologetic and done all the things that everyone would hope for. A lot of people don't get that as well. So being as supportive as you can, no matter whether the one who caused harm is even acknowledging it or not, still try to be supportive of the survivor. And you still can be supportive of both, and you don't have to pick. And you know, it's hard to see if this is true or not, but you don't have to pick. You can honor both children, but honor them, the survivor, if they choose not to associate at some point. It may change or not, but you can't force that. Just say we're family, we should be together, because it's not that easy for the survivors to. They've had to live in a situation where they never felt safe and couldn't get out, and now they're finally out and free enough to feeling safe enough to share that. You know, they have to be honored about what they choose to do at that as an adult.
Well said. I am going to stop the recording here because I do want opportunity for people to be able to ask questions off the recording, and we only have about 5 minutes left. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. We are going to try to put as many links in the comments as we can, and see you next time on SAAN Share.